The big question surrounding vaccines seems to be at the moment, A, getting kind of a suitable candidate, but then the big question beyond that is how does it get scaled and scaled in sufficient quantities that are really going to make a difference? How are you going to achieve the latter part of that?
Hi, well, thanks. And first of all, let me say on behalf of GSK, a huge thank you to all the frontline healthcare workers battling this and the scientists, whether it be in our own companies or around the world, who are trying to stop it in its tracks. As you say, we've announced today what we think is an unprecedented partnership of two of the world's biggest companies in vaccines, leaders in vaccines, with proven technologies in pandemic vaccination, whether that be Sanofi's antigen or the adjuvant that we used successfully in the last pandemic. And exactly as you said, the key of an adjuvant is that it can be antigen sparing, so you can get to producing more volumes and therefore protecting more people sooner. And if we're successful, there's an enormous amount of work to do, and we're still at early stages. But if we're successful and are able to accelerate the timelines as we hope to do, we should be able to get to hundreds of millions of doses by the end of next year. Now, that still means the world is going to need more than one successful vaccine, which is also why this is one of 7 partnerships that we've announced around the world, and wish every success to the other candidates that are developing here. So lots to do, but clearly getting a vaccine that is safe and works and at scale is our #1 priority in terms of what we can contribute as solutions.
Okay, Emma, let's just talk about the scaling. Where do you see it being manufactured? Presumably this will need to be manufactured around the world. And where does the current manufacturing facility, where do the current manufacturing facilities exist that will allow you to scale it quick enough?
Well, we're obviously contributing the adjuvant here, and you're completely right. To get to an urgent solution here, we need not only partnerships, we also need a global approach. So in terms of the adjuvant side of things, would expect to be manufacturing in the US, Europe, potentially even the UK, but that's something that's under ongoing review at the moment, because obviously we have to prepare a degree of capacity at risk. And our goal, I'm sure with the multiple vaccines that will come forward from us and for others, to make sure that we can support access globally, initially to those that most urgently need it, the most vulnerable or indeed the most exposed, but also make sure that we have access not just to developed economies, but for some of those developing economies that are going to be very hard hit by this and often with more vulnerable healthcare systems.
Yeah, you've said you're going to be very equitable when it comes to supplying poor and richer countries. Emma, how do you plan on doing that? How will you make that work? Well,
first of all, this is a global challenge of epic proportions, and again, the world will need more than one vaccine to make sure that we can supply everybody that needs it. Our goal, obviously, this initial partnership is supported also in part by Sanofi's work with BARDA. We hope to engage as urgently as possible with global governments, but also on GSK's side, in terms of our approach across our collaborations, we do expect to donate a certain volume of our adjuvants, and we'll do this by governments and institutions that are committed to access, particularly supporting delivery in the front line. And that means that in developed markets, we'll also be pricing responsibly, as we have a good track record of doing.
So it sounds like you're going to have to prove something to certain governments in order to get some funding, if that's the case. Emma, how will you go about proving that you will have a vaccine on time and that you'll be able to scale up to the necessary amount? Are you going to be converting factories? Are you going to be taking resources away from other drugs?
Well, first of all, you're completely right. Whether it be in therapeutic treatments or in any candidate vaccines, there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that we have the data available, and that's why we have to go into clinical trials to really prove the safety and the efficacy of this candidate. Where we have some confidence, I suppose you would say, recognizing it's still early stages, is these both the antigen and the adjuvant are proven and licensed. But obviously we still need to go through those scale clinical studies. And our experience today, and we're seeing that in tremendous mobilization from the regulators, be it on the therapeutic side or indeed on vaccines work, is the world is mobilized now to try and get to a solution or solutions as soon as possible. So obviously we'll be data-led, and inevitably some of the candidates brought forward won't work, and then we'll be agile around resources to make sure that we're focused on ones that have the highest potential to do so.
Emma, the virus seems to be affecting the elderly more than the younger generations. How do we find a mix in terms of the level within the vaccine, the kind of the strength of the vaccine, to make sure that it kind of helps with elderly people's sort of more compromised immune systems, but doesn't ultimately end up harming younger generations in terms of the dosage?
Well, I just repeat what I've already said, which is that safety is always critical with vaccination, because by definition you're talking about preventative care, whether that be with new babies or with seasonal flu vaccines or shingles vaccines. We're always talking about protecting. So the dosage question is one of the key things that will be being reviewed through the clinical studies that come up to make sure that we get that balance right. And then as production comes through, obviously the goal will be to protect the most vulnerable, be that because of age, other issues, or indeed those that are the most exposed. For example, healthcare professionals and carers in the front line. So that will be the goal of some of the work that lies ahead in this and in other partnerships and across the industry.
Emma, you're going to be competing, even with your partners in this, you're going to be competing with other groups of pharmaceutical companies to try and get your hands on government money, agency money, institutional money, and so on. How do you do that? How do you get your foot in the door first, as it were, to get more money so that you can do all of these great things that you're planning on?
Well, first of all, I think the competition here is against the virus. This is not the time to be, and I'm really not seeing evidence of that. I'm seeing multiple evidence of the industry stepping up together, whether that's being in pooling assets review as we have done in the therapeutics accelerator to make sure that we're screening things that could come through. We're going to need more than one solution here, and I think as we've seen with economic interventions, governments worldwide are recognizing that we need to support credible proposals in terms of funding to get to a solution here, because the cost, be it from a healthcare point of view, an indirect healthcare point of view, or a social point of view as a consequence of the economic impact, is so enormous. I think credible candidates that can come at pace and at scale will be being supported, and like others, we just want to do the right thing, be driven by data and science, and see it as a competition against the virus, not each other.
Emma, bring us up to date on what the experts and your experts are telling you about a vaccine. Will it be something that only works for this particular strain of the coronavirus? If it comes back in the fall or indeed next year in some small mutated form, will you need to then develop yet another vaccine?
Well, it's a very good question, and there's an enormous amount about this virus that's still to be learned, but there's good exchanges of data, and we need to be able to understand how it may or may not mutate. But again, that's also why there's an important role for therapeutics here, and indeed that part of the investment that both industry and I know governments and other institutions are looking at is how we get to better pandemic preparedness, because it is unlikely that this is the only pandemic that we need to be ready for, and we'd like to play our part in making sure the world is a bit more ready next time.
Emma, can you just give us your sense of where we are in terms of test scaling? when do you think that we are going to be seeing scaling of the antigen test that is going to really kind of match up to expectations? And when do you think actually we're going to see a realistic kind of date for a scalable antibody test that will tell us all whether or not we've actually had the virus?
Well, we're not a diagnostic company, so I think that's a question better answered by.
But what is your? But you talk to a lot of people, and you work with a lot of scientists. I'm just curious as to what you're hearing.
So listen, we are like many companies. As we lead through a crisis like this, the first thing we do is worry about our people. Then we worry about business continuity, and I've got 70 factories running with more than 20,000 people going in every day to supply essential drugs. And then the third thing that we do is we worry about how we contribute in terms of solutions. We're doing that at scale with our vaccines and with our therapy work, but we're also trying to engage where we can in practical help. And we are supporting the UK government's testing work in a collaboration with AZ and Cambridge University, and we're doing a similar thing in Belgium with our labs there. And that is very much focused, as we've been requested to, on the PCR testing and being part of the government's efforts to scale that as soon as possible. And we do think in the UK we will be heading towards about 30,000 throughput a day, which will be a contribution, obviously, to the national goals when that's fully operational early May. Obviously, I mean, at this stage, we're not working on any of the antibody testing, but that will be something that will be necessary, as we think about what's required to get to I suppose you should say, a full and complete exit.
Yes.
The first thing that's going to be required is a sufficient scale of vaccines, and of course a degree of antibody testing, and arguably effective tracking and tracing to support that healthy and paced and disciplined recovery from lockdown. And in the meantime, we'll need to find effective ways of managing through it.